Well, that's one way of talking about these people, but I'm not sure it's entirely appropriate, Mark. Okay, so I've just started the recording. So I suggest that we get cracking. So, as I said, I'm doing this because quite a few people have said, oh, I'd like to be able to use R Markdown, but I'm a bit frightened of it. So I thought I'd just run a little thing and show people how to use it. It's very, very easy to use to do the basics once you've got the idea. Some of the more advanced stuff can get very technical, but the basics are easy. One problem with it is that an awful lot of the online literature is written with the assumption that you're a techie nerd, and that often causes trouble if you're trying to deal with YAML headers, for example, and you don't know what YAML is. That can cause trouble. So a lot of the online stuff isn't particularly accessible, but the basics of how to use R Markdown are really quite simple. So what we're going to do today, my plan for today, is I'm going to quickly talk you through what it's all about. We're going to look at some of the formatting options you get in Markdown, and then I'll talk you through the example document that RStudio generates if you ask it to generate an R Markdown document, and show you how to render that into HTML or a document or a Word document or something like that. And then I'm going to show you an example document, and you guys are going to see if you can reproduce it. And I don't know how long that's going to take. Probably not a huge amount of time. But the kind of learning outcome at the end of today is that you understand the basics of how R Markdown works, and you can make a document and you can render it to HTML, and then view it in a browser window. And then tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the bells and whistles, and how you can make your document better. And there's a lot of sort of top tips that, again, are quite hard to find in the literature that are very useful to know. And often you can get stuck for quite a long time trying to work them out, and then you find out that it's actually a very easy fix. So that's the plan. As I say, I don't know how long it's going to take. I'm just going to try and keep it nice and informal. So if anyone's got any questions, stick something in the chat or just shout, and we can have a look at that. But let's kick off with some of these slides, and we're just going to look at sort of the history of R Markdown and so on. So this is my kind of outline of what we're going to do. I don't think we're going to get onto using, well, we'll mention using chunk options at the end of today, but I think that's probably going to be happening tomorrow. Can't see slides. Oh, okay, I shall reshare the slides. I don't know why it stopped sharing them. Got them now? I was assuming they were just still up. Okay, so by the way, these slides were generated in R Markdown. You can make slides in R Markdown as well as other kinds of documents, and these are HTML5 slides. But you can allegedly render to PowerPoint, but I've never tried that. So that's the outline of what we're going to be doing. Let me just, sorry. Having said, there we go. So, sorry, I keep getting confused between my window with the slides and the collaborate window with the slides, which curiously look very, very similar. And I keep clicking on the collaborate window and wondering why the slides aren't advancing. So the question is, what's R Markdown? Well, it's based on a concept that was first introduced by a gentleman called Donald Knuth, who is a god of computer science. He is the man who invented LaTeX, of which we'll have more of. Did he invent LaTeX? He certainly invented tech, which then became LaTeX. If you don't know what that is, don't worry, and it's not as dubious as it might sound. But he came up with this idea of something called literate programming. And his idea was that you should be able to produce a document where you can mix together text and computer code and then the output of that code. And the idea is that if you do that, then you can generate documents which are much easier to read, so that they're put in an order that makes sense to a person rather than an order that makes sense to a computer. They're much easier to understand than reading just a script of code. And the other thing you can do with these things is you can fully reproduce and understand an analysis. So that's a really important point, and that's kind of why everyone is getting excited, or everyone in science is getting excited about R Markdown, because it allows you to generate fully reproducible analyses, and it allows you to make those accessible to other people, which is quite a big deal in my opinion. So that's the background behind it. That's the idea. You can mix up text and code output and generate really cool documents. In the beginning, this was done with an R package called Sweeve, which generated PDF documents only, and it was fine, but it was kind of clunky. And then this guy here, I'm going to try and pronounce his name. I'm going to guess at Yihui Chi. I don't know if that's right or not. Any Chinese people here, please don't be offended if I got it wrong. This guy here, who is a very, very smart man indeed, was doing, I think he was doing his MSc in computer science, or possibly his bachelor's, and he was fed up with trying to use Sweeve to generate documents. So he wrote a package for R called Knitr, K-N-I-T-R, which is basically modern R Markdown. So he did it to make it easier for himself to do his homework, literally. Knitr became a bit of a sensation, and when he'd finished at university, he got a job with RStudio, and the guys at RStudio employed him to produce the modern R Markdown package, and also they integrated R Markdown very, very strongly and very nicely with the RStudio IDE. So there's lots and lots of features built into RStudio that make it easy to generate R Markdown documents. And in fact, it's got to the point now where I would say that if you're going to be making Markdown documents, if you're not doing it in RStudio, you need to really ask yourself why you're doing that, because it's now so easy. So when I first started out doing this, I didn't use RStudio at all, and I would produce my documents in a separate text editor and then render them in base R. But slowly RStudio got better and better and better, and eventually I couldn't ignore it any longer, and I had to switch over. So in the beginning there was Sweeve, and then this guy produced this thing called Knitr to make it easier for him to do his homework. He was then employed by RStudio, and then they built this thing called R Markdown, and they built it in really nicely to RStudio. And as I say, what R Markdown does is it mixes up chunks of R code and text, which is formatted using something called Markdown, and you then use that mix to produce documents. And if you want to produce a reproducible document that lets other people reproduce your analysis exactly, then R Markdown is probably the best way of doing it. There are other options. So Jupyter notebooks, for example. Last time I looked at Jupyter notebooks, they were nowhere near as good as R Markdown. That may have changed, but I don't know. And now we're getting lots of other spin-offs that use R Markdown. So if you want to write a book and you want to have a lot of analysis in it, there's actually something called a package called Bookdown, which adapts R Markdown to let you write a whole book. And also things like interactive tutorials using the Learner package, which we've been using to teach our MSc and undergraduate stats. Those rely on R Markdown to generate the tutorials. So we're now getting spin-offs of R Markdown, which are really cool as well. Right. So I said R Markdown mixes up R code and Markdown. So we also need to know what Markdown is. So some of you probably know something about HTML, and some of you probably don't. So HTML, as you probably know, is the way that we write web pages, or HTML or one of its relatives. And HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And when something's called a markup language, what that means is that you write your document as a text file, but you add tags in to tell your browser or something like that which bits of the text should be headers, which bits are in bold, where to put images, and so on. So there's HTML, which is a markup language that we use to write web pages. HTML is pretty complicated. So Markdown is a light markup language that uses very simple syntax, but lets you generate documents in the same way. And then once you've generated that document, you can render it to an HTML document or a PDF, or nowadays to a Word document or an OpenOffice document, or to a bunch of slides or whatever, or a book. So that's what Markdown is. It's a light markup language that you can use to generate a document. And then R Markdown is Markdown with the addition of chunks of R code that you can run during the rendering process. And R Markdown also has lots and lots of added bells and whistles for things like formatting that Markdown doesn't have. So that's what Markdown is. Is everyone happy so far? If you want me to go through any of that again, just shout. Silence. So I'm going to assume either everyone's asleep or everyone's at least not too distressed. So here, we'll look at Markdown formatting in a lot more detail in just a minute. Well, just several minutes probably. But here are some examples of the kind of thing that you'll see in a Markdown document. So on the left-hand column has the text that you would write in your text file, and the right-hand document has that text rendered as you would see if you rendered a Markdown document. So we've got a header there, and we have, I think, up to 6 levels of header in Markdown. So you can have header 1, which is like that would be the title of your overall document. Header 2 would be your subheadings. So if you're writing a paper, header 1 would be the title of the paper. Header 2 would be introduction, methods, results, discussion. Header 3 would be a subheader within the introduction. Header 4 would be a subheader, and then if you want to have teeny tiny subheaders, you can do that if you want. So we've got different levels of header, and those are indicated by hash symbols there, with the number of hash symbols indicating the level of the header. So that's nice and straightforward. Just plain text is just rendered as text. If you want your text to be in italics, you just put an asterisk before it or after it, and it will then render it as italic. With bold text, you have 2 asterisks before and after, and that renders it as bold. And if you want to put something like a link in, you can do it using this very straightforward syntax here. So the text for your link, where I've wittily written linky link here, goes in a set of square brackets, and then the actual URL goes in a set of round brackets after it, and that renders to the text in the square brackets as an HTML link. So if I clicked on that, it would take me to the departmental web page. Curiously, I don't have any strong desire to do that. So that's an example of how Markdown works. The basics are dead simple.
Does it?
And then,
sorry.
Do you want me to go back?
For the link, yes, please. I was just wondering, for your link, do you need to have the actual link underneath as an on the next line, or can it be directly? No, you don't.
It's just rendered that way because it's in 2 columns. Okay. It doesn't have to be on 2 lines at all. Okay.
Thank you.
So that's how Markdown works, and then we can add code by adding these code chunks. So R Markdown has a special set of characters, and when the document's rendered, it looks through it for those characters, and those characters say to R Markdown, everything after this point is actual R code, and you should run that code until you get to another set of these characters that tell you to stop. So this is an example here, and can you see my mouse pointer? If I highlight that, can you see that? Yep, you can see that. Okay, so this is the special character set that tells R Markdown that you're at the start of a chunk of R code. So it's 3 backticks and then R in curly braces. This is basically chosen because it's a set of characters that you wouldn't normally type in any kind of normal document, which is why it's this kind of somewhat obscure syntax, just these 3 backticks and then an R in curly braces. If you look at an actual R Markdown document, you'll often find there's other stuff in these curly braces as well, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But that's the basic thing that says what follows this is R code. On a Mac keyboard, I can't remember off the top of my head, and I'm actually using a PC here. Bottom left next to Shift. Thank you, Joe. I was just going to run inside and grab my Mac, but that's now no longer necessary. So, and in this case, it does have, the code does have to be on the next line. So you would have 3 backticks and then this on one line, and then your R code, which can just be like a normal R script. You can have comments and things as well. Joe, do you have an Italian Mac keyboard there, Joe? So we've got a Canadian Mac keyboard. I'll leave it to you guys to work out where the backtick is on an Italian Mac keyboard. And then we end the code chunk with another set of 3 backticks, but it doesn't have to have the thing saying R. Okay, so we add these code chunks, and then when the document is rendered, that code will be run, and any output from the chunks will appear underneath that code chunk. So here's what happens if we do that. Here is the rendered code, and you can see that backtick so BACKTICK. I have no idea what that might be in Italian. Yeah, that's it. Is it just backtick with more hand gestures? I don't know. So this is you got it. Nice. So if we render the code, it's kept the code in, but you can ask it not to show the code if you want, and you can see that because I've not had to use strange means to show you the text that means this is R code, it's now put some syntax highlighting on that. And then we've got the output from the code, and the output can be text, it can be a figure, it can be whatever you can get as output from R code. In this case it's a figure, and I've just generated some random numbers and drawn a graph. So that's the yeah, you show your code and the figure in the document. Yeah, the graph will be in the same document, and you can make the figure bigger and smaller if you want. So that's the kind of output you can produce, and you can have text there explaining what the graph is showing as well, of course. Just to show you something a bit more heavy duty, you can incorporate more complicated things as well. So if you want to have an interactive plot, you can render to that. So this is a Plotly interactive plot. This is length versus weight of crayfish, because I had those data, and this is actually an interactive plot. So if I want to turn off the data for males, I can do that. If I want to turn off the data for females, I can do that. If I want to zoom in, I can do that. And if I mouse over particular data points, it shows me that. So that if you're generating HTML slides or an HTML document, you can incorporate interactive plots like this. If you render this into PDF or a Word document, it won't work because they're unable to support that. You can also incorporate things like shiny dashboards in HTML documents and slides. If you don't know what a shiny dashboard is, don't worry, but you can do that. So that's just trying to show you something fancy you can do with R Markdown if you want. So that's, I think, enough of the slides, and hopefully that's given you an idea of how R Markdown works. What we're going to do now is we're going to go through that example Markdown document that RStudio generates. Then we're going to talk a bit more about the formatting options, and then I'm going to ask you to try and generate your own Markdown document. So we can get rid of those slides. And now I'm going to bring up my RStudio screen and talk you through that R Markdown document that it makes. So we don't need to worry about this for the moment. Can you guys all see that?
Yes.
Yeah, we're only interested in the source window, so I'll just maximize that. So if you want to generate a new Markdown document, I don't know if you can see the menus when I pull them down, but if you've got RStudio open and you click on File and you go to New File, then the top option is R Script, the next one is R Notebook, and then the third option is R Markdown. So if you click on that, it brings up a dialog box. Can you see the dialog box or just the RStudio window?
We can see the dialog box.
You can see the dialog box. Cool. So it gives you some options in the dialog box. So we're just going to call it untitled, and we're going to leave author as your name. Some output options, so you can say I want to render it to HTML or PDF or Word. This does not lock you in. If you say PDF here, that doesn't stop you rendering it to HTML or Word later on. It just gives it a preferred option. So we're just going to click OK and go for the default options. If you click Create Empty Document, it just gives you an empty document. But if you click OK, it gives you this option here, which is an example of an R Markdown document. And probably straight away you're looking at that and thinking, well, what on earth is this? It appears to be written in a foreign language that I don't understand. Have you not got R Markdown installed, Beth? I thought RStudio installed it automatically. Oh well, I'll leave you to be getting on with that.
Yeah, mine's installing but running into errors and all sorts of things. But it is in there with RStudio, and I downloaded the latest version of RStudio. But now, having clicked the option for R Markdown, it's doing all sorts of other things.
Oh, what a pain in the ass. Oh well. Hopefully that will get sorted. I'll leave you to get on with it, and I'll talk us through this. So this is an R Markdown document, and as I say, it might look a bit intimidating, but it's actually quite straightforward. So I'll just point out the important bits of it. So the first thing to remember is that although RStudio has made this lots of different colors and added some bits and pieces, this is a pure 100% text document. So these things are different colors because R Markdown or because RStudio is adding syntax highlighting to them, but they're not actually different colors. This is a text document. It's plain text. You could edit this in Notepad or text edit or MS Word or Google Docs or whatever you wanted to edit it in, and it would all work. except you'd have to paste it back into this to render it. So the first thing to know is it's all plain text, but there are these markup codes in it that will then tell the rendering software what format to make bits of it. So that's the first thing to know. It's just plain text. It's just plain text. So up at the top, we've got this stuff here, and these are the headers. These control certain aspects of the overall look and feel of the document. You can alter quite a lot about your document if you know what to do with these headers, but they are not user-friendly. They are written in a third language. So we've already talked about R and Markdown. These are actually written in a third language called YAML, which hilariously stands for yet another markup language. Thank you, nerds. Fortunately, you don't need to know much about YAML at all to be able to use these headers, but for the moment, we're just going to ignore them. And you can go a long way in R Markdown and just ignore these headers, or just change a few things and not really know what it is that you're doing, and it will give you good results. So these are the headers. They can be very useful, but they can be quite complicated, and it's easy to make mistakes. But you can edit them just like anything else. So if you want to change the title from untitled to not titled, you can just type it in, and that will then change the title of the document. Next is this. So you've seen this format before. So this is an R chunk, and as I said, when we get a bit more advanced, we quite often see other stuff in these curly brackets than just the little r. This is the name of the chunk, so you can give your chunks names. If you do that, each chunk has to have a unique name. You can't all have the same. They can't all have the same name, but you can have, chunk 1, chunk 2, chunk 3. It's worth doing that. Okay, I hardly ever do that, but I then get very cross with myself for not doing that, because when you try and render your document and there's an error, it will tell you the name of the chunk where the error is. And if you've got 50 chunks of code in your document, that can be very, very useful. So there's a top tip. You should put names for your chunks, preferably ones that tell you what it's doing. I don't, because I'm rubbish, and then I get cross with myself. Don't be like me. So that's the name of the chunk, setup, and it's just setting up certain options for the document. And then we've got a chunk option, which is include equals false. So that is actually telling the rendering software not to include this bit of code. And then there's this, which is which we don't need to worry about for the moment, really. It's setting a global option, which is actually the default global option anyway. If we deleted this whole chunk at the moment, the document would render in exactly the same way. But if you want to set global options for your chunks, you can do it here. So that's just a setup chunk of code. We don't need to worry too much about it for the moment, but you can use that in the future to set global options. Then we have this, and you've seen this format before. So we've got 2 hashes. So this is a header, and this is a level 2 header. It's going to put a title, which will be not titled because I changed it from untitled, at the top of the document. That's essentially going to be a level 1 header. So this is a level 2 header, and it just says R Markdown. And then we've got some text. This is an R Markdown document, blah, blah, blah. And you can see there's some formatting there. So if we rendered that word knit would be rendered as bold because it's got the 2 asterisks around it. So there's some text, and then we've got another R chunk, and this is called cars. and the cars dataset is one of the built-in datasets in R, and if that chunk is rendered, it will just give you the output of running summary on the cars dataset. Then we've got another header, and it's which I've deleted, and it's just giving us an example of how you can embed plots in your Markdown document. And it's just saying at the moment we've added echo equals false, and if you add that chunk option, echo equals false, what that means is it will run the chunk, but it won't include the code. It will just include the output from the code. So include equals false means it'll run it, but it won't put the code in or any output code. Echo equals false means that it will run the chunk, but it will only put the output in. And it's, as you can see, it's set a default option there of echo equals true, but here we're changing that option just for this one chunk. So that's the example Markdown document that R Markdown gives us. And if we want to convert that to HTML, we just click on knit to HTML, and it asks us to save it. So I'll save it and call it temp1. So it won't render it unless you actually save it. Doesn't like it. What have I done? Just hang on. This is going well. I love it when a plan comes together and everything works so smoothly. Somehow that false got deleted. Let's try again. This will work, of course. So you can see in this pane here, it's just running some code, and then this is the output that you get. So you can see that's our level 1 title, which is the title of the document, and then
I don't think it's showing up if you're trying to show us a different document.
Yeah, I'll do that. Just hang on. Yeah. Right, there it is. Can you see that?
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, so this is the rendered document. It's a very, very basic Markdown document, but you can see the fundamental goings on, and you can see the output of that code. So there isn't any code here because we had echo equals false, and then we've got the output of that plot. So that's how our basic Markdown document works. I'm just going to go back to RStudio and show you something that's very new, that will probably make some of you call. I'm going to show you two things. So can you see the RStudio window?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Okay. So two things that are really helpful to know. There's all sorts of buttons up here that we're not going to particularly worry about. This button here. So if you can see this button here with some little lines in, if you click that, it opens this thing up in the right-hand margin, and your headers will be listed there. So if you want to go to a header in your document, if you've got a long Markdown document with a whole series of headers, this gives you the document structure, and you can use that to navigate, which is really cool. If you're just writing in our script, you can also use this if you have sections in your document, and it will, so you can put in sections in a standard R script, and you can navigate between them. And I think any functions that you define will also show up in here. So that's a really useful top tip for those who don't know about it. The other top tip is this is the latest addition to RStudio, and I've moused over that, and you'll see it's a picture of a pair of compasses. And it says switch to visual Markdown editor. Okay, so far we've just been looking at this as a text document. We can click on this, and what it does is this. So it does work. It gives you a sort of MS Word style toolbar across here, and it lets you edit your Markdown document in a much more sort of WYSIWYG fashion. We've got a question. Are you you might have an old version of RStudio, Beth, if it's not there. It's only recently been included. Can everyone else get it? If you don't have it, I'm now trying to remember. It might still be on the development option only. I don't think it is. But if it is, you can find the development version of RStudio and download it. Yeah, okay. So either you need to update it or it's only on the development option. Janie's got it. Okay, so some of us have got it, some of us haven't. So if you're using this and you want to include a header, for example, so if I want to include a level 3 header here, I can just pull this down and say put in a level 3 header, and we're going to call that new header, and then you can click on insert if you want to put in a chunk, and you can put Python and SQL and whatever chunks in there as well if you want. You can put in an image, you can put in a link. You've got options for formatting here as well. It's very cool. If you just want to make basic Markdown documents, it's pretty cool. I actually really hate using it because I'm a terrible nerd. No, I really hate using it because it's difficult to get the level of control that you get if you're running it in text, which I know is the kind of thing that really annoying people say. Look at this really easy to use, useful thing that will make you happy. I think it's awful. But anyway, so that is there as an option. I'm not going to be using it for the rest of this. But obviously, if you want to use it, please go ahead. And at least you're aware that it's there. At the very least, if you understand how Markdown works and how the chunk options work and things like that, it's going to be much easier to use this. And you can also switch backwards and forwards. So the reason I actually don't use it is I just find that I'm constantly switching backwards and forwards between the text version and the visual editor version, and it does take a little while to decide what it's going to do. So I just get annoyed. So anyway, that's there. It's really cool. It's changing everyone's lives for the better. I think it sucks because I'm a terrible nerd, but it's there. It's there as an option. Okay, so that's the basics of how an R Markdown document works. Hopefully you can see that it's really pretty straightforward. And an RStudio is set up to make it easy for you to generate nice Markdown documents. So far, I've only talked about knitting to HTML. Obviously, you have options here to knit to Word and knit to PDF. So we can knit our document to Word, and it will, again, we get some stuff going on here.
Rob, can I ask you something?
Yep.
Can you repeat again the part with the different chunks for different software like Python and so on? Because I realized that it's not entirely clear to me.
Okay, so you can put in. So if you, I just mentioned that when I had the visual editor open. So the text for for an R chunk is backtick, 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 and then the braces with an R. If you put other things than R, you can put in other kinds of code. So RStudio, the company, I think, are trying to take over the galaxy with their IDE, and they're working very hard to incorporate C++, Python, and a lot of other languages into it. So one thing that you can do now with your R Markdown is you can just mix in Python chunks, or SQL chunks, or Stan, or whatever.
So they will be rendered with other software. Now we're using R, which is the default, but I can also use this for Python, let's say. I think so.
I okay. Don't know, but that is there as an option. And if you look, you will probably find quite a lot of information on that. I mean, you can use C++ code in your R script. There's packages that allow you to do that. I wouldn't be surprised if they're putting a full Python installation in this pretty soon. But yeah, I don't know much about that, but I'm sure you can find out about it. So our CCP there is the one that allows you to put C++ within an R script, and I know that works really nicely. But I've not tried it with Python. Okay. Right. So now we've gone through that. As I said, we can knit it to other formats than HTML. So I've just knitted this to Word, and I'll show you the Word document it's produced. I'll just have to change the screen share. Just hang on. So that's the Word document. For some reason, it's done it in dark mode. I don't know why. How do I change the mode? Nope. Switch modes. Right, so that's a more familiar Word mode. You can see this is the document it's produced, and it's very similar to that HTML document, except it's a Word document. Let's just go back to our R window. It is how I wrote the introduction to our book. Yes, I wrote it all in Markdown. And in fact, the 3rd edition is written in Bookdown, and it's coming out real soon now. Real soon now. So the other option is knit to PDF. I'm not going to show you how to knit to PDF. And the reason for that is if you want to generate a PDF document from your Markdown document, you need to have LaTeX installed. If you don't know what LaTeX is, I'm not sure I should tell you, because I don't want to increase the global amount of misery. For those of you, if anyone doesn't know what LaTeX is, it's actually a bit similar to Markdown in that it's a markup language for generating PDFs, which is what all the mathematicians use, and all the engineers use it, and there's some great courses on it recently, apparently. So there we go. And it's quite complicated and quite difficult. You can generate some beautiful things with it, but it's complicated and difficult. And if you're not familiar with LaTeX, then learning LaTeX just so that you can generate PDFs out of our Markdown is probably a bit too much. And the reason I'm not going to show you a document rendered to PDF is that I broke my LaTeX installation this morning trying to render a document to PDF. And then I tried to reinstall the LaTeX distribution I had, and it broke it even more. So I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm now going to say something that will get me thrown out of the nerd club forever. If you want to generate lots of PDFs with our Markdown, it's worth your while learning a bit of LaTeX and getting LaTeX installed and getting that running. If you only very occasionally want to generate PDFs from R Markdown, render it to a Word document, format it how you like, and then export it to a PDF. That will retain your sanity. Please don't tell anyone I said that. So that's an example of the kind of things we can do. What I'm going to do now is I'm just quickly going to talk us through some of the formatting options that are available for Markdown and things like that. I don't think you can. Obviously, if you're really smart, you can render them to LaTeX and then submit them as PDFs, and some journals let you submit actual LaTeX documents. You can always render to okay, there's thesis, there is a package called Thesis Down for generating PhD theses in Markdown. So you might want to look into that. What were we talking about? PDFs and submitting to journals. Yeah. So one issue with doing your reproducible research in R Markdown is that R Markdown is best at generating HTML, and you can generate really, really nice HTML documents easily with R Markdown. If you then submit them to a journal, what you'll find is that either it won't let you submit it at all, or Manuscript Central will badly convert your beautiful HTML document with tabs and floating menus to a nasty PDF that's no good to anyone. So if you try and submit a Markdown document as, for example, supplementary information for a paper you're submitting, it's quite annoying because the journals haven't caught up yet, and they're still making you submit as PDF or Word, which is annoying because you can't use really cool features like code folding that make the document much more readable, which we'll look at tomorrow. Any more questions? There were quite a few that I missed. Can you output to Word and save as PDF? Yes, you can. Thankfully, you know, once it's output to Word, you can do whatever you would normally do with a Word document with it. Anyway, so we're just going to have a look at some of the formatting options, and then I'm going to give you this great idea I had, which is I'll give you an example of a document and you guys can have a go at reproducing it. So I'm just going to share a different screen. So if you look online for something like R Markdown cheat sheet, you'll find lots of PDFs with many thousands of tiny words on them that are very hard to read, that have all the formatting things and everything else. I really hate those because they're just really difficult to navigate, because they're trying to put everything about a quite complex software package into a single A4 sheet. So I generated a document with some formatting basics, which I think is a bit more readable and which we can talk through. So you guys can see this now. It says R Markdown formatting basics. Yep, can you all see that?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So if you look in the chat, there's a link to this, and I will also email everyone a copy of this HTML document afterwards. One of the, just going down a slight digression again, one of the good things about the HTML documents that Markdown produces is that everything is actually in a single document. So as you probably know, most HTML documents, you would have the figures as separate files from the actual document, and then you just have a tag in the document that says, put this figure here. And then when you read it in your browser, you see the figure. R Markdown actually embeds images and things like that within the document. So instead of producing 5 documents with each figure as a separate image file, it produces just one single HTML document that you can then easily email to people. So this is all one HTML document, which makes life a lot easier. And as I said, there's a link to that in the chat. If anyone can't see it, maybe because you came in late, say now and I'll put the link in again. So this is just a set of the kind of formatting things you might want. Let me just go and see what's going on in the chat. Can't see the link. Okay, I'll paste it in again. Just give me a second. There it is. So this is just a list of the kind of useful things you might want to do in your document, and this is mostly ways of formatting the text, and then there's just something on the code chunks at the end, but most of the important stuff about code chunks I think we'll look at tomorrow. So we've already looked at the headers, so that's what makes header 1, and that is header 1. That's what makes header 2, and that is header 2. If you just render this with the default options in R Markdown, it'll look slightly different because I've used a specific theme here, which again we'll talk about tomorrow. But that's the markup code for headers, and that's the headers as they look rendered. Text formatting, there's a whole bunch of things here. So italics and bold we've already looked at. You can generate these either with 1 or 2 underscores. That should be 2 underscores. It's munged them together in rendering, or 1 or 2 asterisks, and that'll give you italics. You can put in block quotes just by putting a greater than sign before your text, and then the whole paragraph will be rendered as a block quote with just that one markup there. So that's an example. Things that you don't get in base Markdown that you do get in R Markdown, so superscript and subscript. So superscript is just a hat, and then another hat saying when to stop the superscript, and subscript is a tilde at each end. Strike through is 2 tildes. Underlining. So for reasons that are obscure, Markdown doesn't let you underline things. If you read the documentation on R Markdown, there's some fairly sniffy stuff about how content formatting is much better done with bold and italics than with underlining, and underlining is more of a syntactical thing than a content emphasis thing, and that kind of guff. Why they can't just say, here's an option for underlining, use it if you want to, but we think it's a bit rubbish, I don't know. So you can't underline things in Markdown. There's a comment. Yeah, they're probably the same people who called YAML. Yeah, so you can't underline things because the Markdown people say it's bad. There's a workaround. So one thing about R Markdown or Markdown generally, it renders things to HTML. If you put straight HTML in your document, it will see that's HTML and just leave it as it is. And then when you read it in a browser, the HTML will be rendered. So you can actually use an HTML tag to make your text underlined. And the HTML tag for underlining is very simple. It's just a U. So that's an example of what you would do, and that would generate underlined text. The problem with that is it will only work if you render to HTML. So if you're rendering to PDF, you need to use the LaTeX tag for underline, which is \underline, and then anything that you want underlined in curly brackets after it. And if you're rendering to Word, you just have to edit in Word and underline it. So you can underline it, but it will only work in HTML if you use that slightly hacky workaround there. And then we've got, if you're keen on your formatting and you want proper M dashes, you can make an M dash with three hyphens will generate an M dash for you. So that's basic formatting. If you want to make a list, you just give it numbers with a full stop and then a space, and that will generate a list. One thing to watch out for is the Markdown renderer doesn't care what the numbers are as long as they're numbers. So if you use 1 and 5, it will render to 1 and 2. So that's something to look out for. If you really have to have a list that goes 1, 5, 6, you can use what's called an escape character. If you put a backslash before the full stop, that will escape it. It won't indent it, but it will give you a list that goes 1 to 5 without 2, 3, and 4. But anyway, that's how you make an ordered list. You can make bullet points either with asterisks or hyphens, and those will generate that. And you can have multi-level bullet point lists. So if you indent your bullet points using spaces, you get something like that. Do not use tabs to indent these. It will make your life miserable. Again, this is a top tip from me. At some point in the past, I've spent a day weeping over a keyboard because my bullets wouldn't in, and then found out it's because I was evil and used tabs rather than spaces to indent. Once again, those Markdown people must be great fun at parties. So those are bullet points. I'm going through this fairly fast because you've got access to this document, and it's just telling you the kind of things you can do. If you want to put in a link, we've already seen this. The text for the link goes in square brackets, and then the actual URL goes in round brackets, and that generates that. And if I click on that, it will take us to that unexciting website, but we won't bother. For images, it's almost the exact same syntax as for a link, except you add an exclamation mark at the beginning. If you're using an image that's on your hard drive, so if you're using a local image, then you need the file path to that image. In this case, the JPEG is in the same folder as the Markdown document. So I just need to use the name of the JPEG, and you need to include the suffix as well. You know, if the name includes .jpg and you don't include that, it will just get sad and unhappy and have a sad on at you. But if it's in a different folder from your Markdown document, you need to give it a file path. It could be a relative file path or an absolute file path. But you can include images like that. And one thing that's new in our Markdown is you can now change the size of images, which you didn't used to be able to. So if you add something in curly brackets saying width equals 100, that will render it with the image width set to 100 pixels. If you specify width equals 50%, it will render it with the width as 50% of what it was. Yeah, well, it's no, you can't, Elisabetta. That's one thing that's quite difficult. If you want if you want an image right justified or center justified, you can do it, but you have to do it with HTML. There isn't anything in Markdown at the moment that will let you do that. Oh, that is a good question. I think it goes from the RMD script, Joe. I couldn't swear to it though. I mean, when in doubt, make an RStudio project and then stick it all in the project, and then your life will be easy. But yeah, very, very good question. Oh, I hate it when people ask questions like that when I don't know the answers. But anyway, so there you go. You can put images, and then we have tables. Tables are tricky in R Markdown. There is a default Markdown option for tables where you actually basically draw your table with pipes and hyphens, and that will render to a table like this in R Markdown. If you've got a big table, typing all of this out is going to send you mad. But there are some online Markdown table generators, which will make things much easier for you. But that's the default option in Markdown, which is kind of sucky. One reason it sucks is that the table extends all the way across the HTML document. There's lots of packages which try to fix this, and there are also options for rendering matrices and data frames as tables. So what I'm doing here is I'm generating a matrix, and then I'm using a function called cable, which is in the literate package, which R Markdown is still built on. So this is the package that Yuichi originally wrote, and I'm calling that from that package. It's a little bit clunky, and then it's rendering the matrix as a table. If you just put the name of the matrix, it will just print it as it would in the R console. It still sucks because it's a full width table. There's another package called Cable Extra, which lets you do lots of things with formatting. So we can then take our cable table and then run it through cable styling, for example, from Cable Extra, and that generates a table that's actually, that isn't stupidly wide. But in general, tables are tricky in R Markdown, I'm afraid. There's lots of other packages to make nice tables. There's Stargazer, there's Xtable, there's FlexTable, and various others. I'll leave it up to you to explore those if you want to. And I've also put in a little bit something here about options for printing things like data frames as tables. We're going to talk about the headers tomorrow, I think, but you can, if you add something to the header, you can fix it so that it will automatically render data frames in a nice table format, rather than just printing them out as it would otherwise do. So that's there as an option as well. I just put that in so you know. And then finally, we've got this thing here where I've just got the detail on code chunks again. I talked about escape characters earlier. So if you want to escape something and stop Markdown converting it into a formatting tag, let's say you've got a hash. Let's say for some reason you want to write hash, then some text, and then leave, and then go on to the next line, and you don't want it to be rendered as a header. If you put a backslash before the hash, it will escape it, and Markdown knows to just render it as text. Escaping code chunks is really difficult in Markdown. Just doing it with backslashes does not work. There are pages, if you go on the RStudio website, there's a whole page of more or less hacky, dirty options for doing it, which is why these code chunks here look slightly weird, but they are there. So this is so if you just use the 3 backticks and don't put anything else, it will render it as a code block, but it won't run the code. And it won't syntax highlight it either. So it looks like this if you do that. That's a chunk of our code. We've already met that, and it renders to that. So it includes the R code, and then it gives you the output. And we've seen there are options for not including the output if you want, and that's there. And then the last thing here, which I've not mentioned before, is that you can actually put code within your lines of text. So in addition to these chunks of code, you can also have what we call inline code. And this is particularly difficult to escape, it turns out. And all the hacky methods on the internet that I tried just didn't work. So I've done something here which lets me put the text in at least, although it's formatted in a funny way. But you can see, so I've generated a variable called output, and it's just got 20 uniformly distributed random numbers in. And then this is a line of text here, and there's actually some R code in line in this text. So here we've got a single backtick, a lowercase r, a space, and then a bit of R code, and then another backtick, and that's inline R code. And if you put inline R code in like that, it will render the line of text as text, but it will just put the output from that piece of R code in. So that line of text there will render as that, which has the mean value for this output 1 variable included in that line. So if you want to generate reports where you're calculating, you can calculate a p-value, and then you can put that p-value in your text without actually going and looking up the number. So if you're doing repeated analyses and you want to repeatedly put, say, p-values or something else in some text, you can do that using inline code like this, which is really cool. Back to this. Cheers, Mark. Hope that was useful. Yeah, it is. It's super cool, Elisabetta. Okay, so it's 3:10. I'm going to finish my cold coffee. And we have, so we've gone through the formatting. I'm going to stop sharing that. And for those of you who wish, I'll put another URL. This will make Joe happy because it has a dung beetle in it. I'll put the URL in the chat and I'll bring it up on the in so many ways, Joe. So that's another. This is a document that here's one I prepared earlier. I'll just show this to you and quickly talk you through this document, and then if you want to, you can have a go at reproducing it, which should be relatively easy, and then you can render it yourself. So let's just talk through this. So it's very similar to what we saw before. It's a document with some formatting. There's a bullet point list here. We've got some headers. So that's the title. We've got a header 2 and a header 3. You can see that you can use formatting within a header. So that's italicized. I've given you a URL of a photo of one of these beetles. That is going to be familiar to those of you who walk up and down the stairs in the fog building. There's a URL there, and you can, if you're putting an image in a Markdown document, the image doesn't have to be on your hard drive. You can pull it off the internet as well. So you can use that URL to put an image in the document, and then very similar to what was in the other document we looked at, there's just some code there to generate a up here we've got a table of contents which is automatically generated. You can see that the different level headers within the table of contents. I'll show you how to do that once we've had a go at reproducing this document. Let me just go back here. There's some questions in the chat. Okay, cheers, Elisabetta. So either you can just go now if you want, or you can have a go at this, and I'm going to stay here, and if you have anything that won't work, then just ask. You can share your screen if necessary. I would imagine that the common mistakes will probably happen quite early on, so if you sit and listen, then other people might make the same mistake for you and might fix things. If you want to try and generate a different document, feel free, although it might be a bit harder for me to fix any problems with it. So is everyone happy with that? If no one says anything, I'll assume yes.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so go into RStudio, generate a new document, delete all the guff it puts in there, and then start working on this. So this stuff will go in the, you'll specify this in the dialog box it produces when you tell it to generate a new document. As I say, don't worry about the table of contents. I'll show you that in a minute. Sorry, you can't see me waving my mouse pointer, can you? This stuff, sorry, I was looking at the other window. This stuff goes in the dialog box. Don't worry about the table of contents for the moment. Once you've got your document sorted, I'll show you how to do that. It's dead easy. And then the rest of it is some fairly basic formatting, and you've got access to the formatting basics document as well. So I'll let you guys get on with it and sit here and wait for any questions, or if anyone's got any questions now, feel free to ask. That coffee is very cold.
Hi, Rob. My RStudio, I've downloaded the latest version, updated to the latest version, but when I try and open a R Markdown file, I'm getting a message saying it needs an updated version of the xfun package, which I'm installing it, and then I try and open a Markdown file, and it tells me again that that's what it needs.
Updated version of which package?
Xfun.
Xfun.
Yeah. My instinct is to restart my computer and see if that helps.
Yeah.
Because it's installing it successfully, and it's not saying it needs any dependencies or anything, but it's just not recognizing that it's there. So
if it's any help, I don't have xfun installed on mine. So God knows what's going on there. I would shut it down and start again.
Yeah. So I've tried shutting RStudio down, but I think I'm just going to try and restart my computer and see what happens.
Yeah, I'd
see if that sorts it out.
I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Are you on? That's not something to do with X Windows, is it? Are you on a Mac or a PC?
I'm on a PC.
So probably not. No, I don't know
I've used R Markdown documents before and never had a problem, but yeah, I'll restart and see if it's just an issue with my computer not finding the right file.
Well, can I ask a really silly question?
Sorry, can you just say that again?
I have a very silly question.
Sure.
I'm not sure how you start, because I was trying to install stuff at the beginning. So if I open an R Markdown page and I'm looking at where it says, it gives you some basic titles and author date, are we supposed to start by pasting over top of some of the text, like this is an R Markdown document?
Yeah, just highlight all of that and delete it. So leave the headers at the top.
Yeah,
you've got,
and the R setup includes calls.
Yeah, you can leave that in. You might as well. And then delete everything else and start again.
Okay, thank you.
$2 o'clock tomorrow. No worries, Omar. Speak to you tomorrow. Have a good evening. Let's hope RStudio gets sorted out.
Hi, Rob. I have a question about the generating and plotting data section.
Yep.
So when we're putting in the two variables and it converts it to having that little gray box around them, does that happen automatically, or is that some formatting going into it, which has the correlation coefficient for x var and y var?
So you've got the two lines of code where it generates the two variables with the grey box around.
And the text after.
That happens automatically with any R code chunk. It will do that.
Okay.
And
perfect.
then the next line. If you just use a single backtick and don't put an R for inline code, it will render what's between your single backticks with a little grey background, like it's done. So you can specify code inline without having it run. So that's what I've done to x var and y var, and then I've used inline code to generate the correlation coefficient there.
Okay.
So,
give me a second. I'll see if I can get that to work.
Have a go. If it doesn't work, I'll show you. If it doesn't, if you can't get it to work, I'll show you how I did it.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, Rob. With the inline code, can you put more than one line of code in there, or does it have to be like a one-line code?
I think if you put more than one line of code in, it will still run it. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but as long as it's within a paragraph of text, I think it'll be fine. Oh, good. Yeah, I just think it would just get very clunky. So I wouldn't normally do that myself. I mean, you can always put a code chunk in somewhere else and put echo equals false, or if you put include equals false, then it won't show anything. But if you generate, let's say you generate a p-value or a correlation coefficient in a code chunk where you've set the chunk option to be include equals false, that value will still be available elsewhere. So you can put something in your inline code that will pull that out for you. Which is going to be a much less clunky way of doing it.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
So is yours working now, Louise? Who knows?
Hi, sorry. Yes, it has opened a document for me. I just needed to install the package in a more conventional way instead of clicking on yes, please install it, because there was something missing. It needed compilation. It's working now, so that's good.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of these buttons that you can click on in RStudio that work some of the time.
Yeah, no, I just went back to I'll just try install packages, and that seemed to do the trick. Yeah.
That makes me pleased because I don't like clicking buttons. I like writing code.
Yeah.
Because I'm like that.
Yes, I decided that was the best way to go about it.
Rob, how do we change headers? So I made headers that match yours, but they're smaller, and I'm not sure how to. Do you know which one you picked, or is there?
By smaller.
Well, I picked two pound keys. I'm not sure what yours are. I'm trying to make them match.
Yeah. Let me just look at one thing. So what you generate when you render won't necessarily look the same as mine, because it's being interpreted for you by a browser. So this is when looking at this document here, I'm looking at this through Chrome. If you render something in RStudio, it will open it in its own little browser window for you. If you've used all the default options and you've used a header 2 for, say, scientific names there, it may look different in the RStudio browser window than it would in your normal browser. So if you've got it open in your in the RStudio preview browser, if you look at the top of the window, there should be a thing to click that says open in browser. So try having a look in your normal browser and compare it with how my document looks in your browser if you follow that link. Does that look the same?
Okay, I was using the button you hate to try and see things before I tried to output it.
Okay, so if you're just looking at it in the Markdown window with the visual editor on, it will look very different. You have to render it.
Okay, it seemed like a good way to check and see if my code was even working.
Yeah, no, it is. But so one thing that's important to remember is that when you're writing material that people are going to view through a browser, you have less control over how it looks than if, for example, well, if you're generating a PDF, you've got complete control over that. If you generate a Word document, you've got some control over that. If people are looking at it through a browser, you could do your best to try and make it look how you want it to look, but ultimately it's going to depend on the settings of their browser. So you can't guarantee that things will always look the same. And obviously, if you're using the visual editor, it's going to look different again. But yeah, that's a good way of. Sorry.
Okay, I understand that. I've gotten completely stumped at the make a list. I'm trying to use the asterisk bit, and it's interpreting them and turning everything into italics.
Okay, so asterisk. Have you got a space after the asterisk?
No.
Right, spaces after the asterisks. Try that.
Trying to be smart and move them all around to make it all italics.
So you need an asterisk and then a space and then family Scarabaeidae or whatever, and then carriage return at the end, and then another asterisk on the next line, and then a space, and then genus Prygodiris or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I got it now. It was the space I was missing.
Yeah, and that's the common mistake. So if you don't have a space after a pound sign or a hash, it won't recognize it as a header. So asterisk, no space, it's going to think you're trying to make something italicized, and it's going to look for that next asterisk. Asterisk with a space, it's going to think you're trying to make a bullet list.
Rob, sorry, I've got another question.
Yeah.
why do you name the images like in the example you've given in the square brackets? Because it doesn't seem to do anything.
You don't have to. You can just leave the square brackets with no text there, and it will work absolutely fine. If you want to give it's a quick and dirty way of giving your figure a caption, so you can see it appears underneath it. If you want to give proper figure captions, you can do that using code chunks. But the other thing is, if you have someone with visual impairment reading the document with a screen reader, it will read them what that alt text says for the figure. So you don't have to do it, but if there's a possibility that someone with a visual impairment might be using a screen reader, then it's the decent thing to do. And you might want to put in, so you can, if you want, put in quite a complex description of the picture, if that's necessary, and if you're trying to make it accessible.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
How to use code chunks for proper figure captions? No, that's great. Cheers, Liam. Nice one, Beatrice. You put in a thing in the chunk options, so that this doesn't actually work for images, but it works for graphs. So if you put in a chunk option, well, I mean, we'll do this tomorrow, but if you put in a chunk option that says fig.cap equals, I'll put this in the chat, and then quote marks, figure 1, my lovely graph. So if you cheers, Joanna, if you put that in, it will put that in as a figure caption. You can format it as well, so you can make figure 1 bold if you want, and you can put, you know, big figure captions in if you want, or that does make that bit in curly brackets look a bit funny. Better than the original. That's because you've got 2 pictures of a Pragadeers, haven't you, Joe? Cheers. Cheers, Joe. See you tomorrow, mate.
Okay, I found a reason to hate that little button that lets you peek at what you're doing.
I told you it's bad.
No, like in the generate plot dataset, when you put in the 3 back ticks, if you click the button to go see what you've done and go back, they're invisible.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I don't like it.
And so you can't edit them or know they're there, or.
Yes. Yeah, so if you, I mean, you can bring up the visual editor, and then the code chunks will be delimited by highlighting in the screen, and then if you click it again, your 3 ticks will reappear. But yeah, it's just one of those. That's one of the reasons I don't particularly like using it. Oh, all right. So, how to make the table of contents work? Let me just bring up my RStudio window. So this is my version here of the document that I showed you, and the way you get the table of contents to work is here. So I put this in just so that, obviously a lot of people have gone, but just so that you get an example of how you can use these headers to change your document. So if you just have, let me get rid of that. So this is just the document that it generates. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Let me just edit that. Sorry. So if you just generate a standard Markdown document, then your headers are going to look like this, or something like this. And there's a thing saying output. Sorry, I'm just breaking everything. There's a thing saying output, and it says HTML document, and that's all it says. If you want to add a table of contents, you tell it to do that by editing this particular header. And what you do, stop it. What you do is you change it from just saying output HTML document. You indent HTML document underneath output. You add a colon at the end, and then you add this saying TOC yes. So if you put that in your header and then render your document again, you should get a document with a table of contents the same as mine. The place you are likely to trip up here is with the indenting. Remember I said before about indenting for your bullet lists and only using spaces. You must only use spaces to indent in YAML. The people who made YAML, in addition to being so funny that they call it YAML, have a real thing about indenting using tabs. Have any of you watched the TV show Silicon Valley? If you have, then like the main character has, like, one of his things is he's got a real thing about indenting using spaces and not tabs, for reasons that are never explained. Anyway, I think he's based on the people who wrote YAML. So you must do that indentation using tabs. It doesn't really matter how many you must do it using spaces. It doesn't really matter how many spaces you use. And in fact, RStudio now tries to munge it for you. But I would use 2 for HTML document and then 4 for TOC. So if you do that, you should generate it and then render it. It should generate a table of contents for you. Excellent. Reproducible research, you see.
All right, I'm leaving now, Robert. Thank you very much for all the help.
No problem.
Yeah,
I hope you enjoyed it.
Tomorrow. Bye.
Cheers, then. Bye. I'll send around the link for tomorrow's thing as soon as we're done here.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers.
Rob, I've remarkably made that right page. It looks right, which is some sort of minor miracle in my case. Other than the thing you just explained about the navigation section, I just didn't do that. But what I don't understand is the discussion, although it worked, about how you turn on and off the R scripting. I didn't get that. So I've generated the plot as expected on my Markdown sheet, but there was you were trying to explain the use of the 3 ticks to either make the code render or not render and appear or not appear with the output.
So if you put, let me just go to my document. So you've knitted it to HTML and it's popped up as a, so we're not talking about what you're seeing in the visual editor. So
no, it's actually, everything's worked fine. I'm just not entirely sure how I did it.
Okay. So
like if I didn't want it to actually produce the graph, how would I change it so it just showed the code, not the graph? What is shifting?
If you just wanted the code and not the graph, you would do this. Yeah. So you would add a chunk option if val equals false. And if
so
you
don't
do
actually
that,
do what I'm telling you to do. Okay.
Sorry?
So don't actually do what I'm telling you to do.
Well, you can do it if you want, but you won't get a graph.
I mean that's what that, I mean that's what that code means. That code is telling it don't do the following.
Yeah, it's saying put this code in, but don't actually run it.
Okay.
Okay, and if you put in something different, so if you put in echo equals false, if you do that, it will run the code and put the output in, so it will put the graph in, but you won't see the code that generated the graph. So it won't. Yeah, it won't put the code in the document, but it will put the output in.
Okay.
So if you're trying to make a nice document and you don't want any nasty code in there, for whatever reason, if you go to this setup chunk at the beginning and you change it from echo equals true to echo equals false, and then you render that, you won't see any code in the document at all. It'll just have the output of the code, because that will then be, that's setting that as the default option for all of the code chunks. One thing we'll cover tomorrow is you can set it so that you have code folding. So you can generate an HTML document where the code is hidden, but there's a little button that you can click that brings the code up. And I'll show you how to do that tomorrow. So you can generate really cool documents with that, because you know, you aren't wading through 50 lines of code before you look at the graph. But if you look at the graph and you think, I wonder how they drew that, you can just click on the button and it brings up the code that generated the graph. So that's a really cool thing you can do. And as I say, we'll do that tomorrow.
Okay, that's really great. Thanks. And will you go over the navigation panel again tomorrow with everybody else when there's more than 6 of us?
We'll go through the headers and all the fun of YAML.
Okay, thank you very much. That worked.
Cheers, Beth. Have a good, whatever it is in Canada, night, morning.
It's not even lunchtime yet.
Oh, well, whatever. Yeah, have a good afternoon then. Cheers. Cheers. See you tomorrow, Jenny. Okay, right. I think that's it. So it's just you and me left, Louise. So you're off. So I shall bid you farewell. I'll see you tomorrow. And I'll
Yeah,
stop
thanks.
that
Sorry, I started late because of my
no,
package
it's
problem,
absolutely.
but yeah, all worked fine. And it is a little bit like using LaTeX, isn't it? It's in terms of the way you have to think about it.
The basic principle's the same.
Yeah.
It's just much easier than LaTeX. So one thing we'll go through tomorrow is putting maths in. So you can put in fully formatted LaTeX maths in your R Markdown document, and it renders beautifully, which means that the main reason to use LaTeX, which is the fact that you can put in really nice maths, is no longer there.
Yeah. So I was just wondering because I've all my images, all my plots and everything are from R, but when I save it to image and then put it in a Word document, they all just don't look very good, and I just wondered if it was going to look better doing it this way.
If you render it to Word, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know actually.
I'm going to try a couple of them and see if they look better as a Word document than they do when I save it to image and then import it into Word. Let's see if it looks better.
So Word used to really munge images when it imported them.
Oh yeah,
I thought they fixed it. But anyway.
It depends how you save it, I think, to begin with.
Yeah.
Right, great. Thanks a lot, Rob. This was really useful. I'll see you tomorrow.
No problem. See you tomorrow.